Say good morning. No. Say good morning. No.
This story isn't just disturbing, it will haunt you long after it ends. It's a chilling tale of love, obsession, and a relationship that didn't just fall apart but erupted into something far more sinister. At the heart of it were two people, Roosevelt Davis III, a 23-year-old former college football player with a promising future, and Khadijah Birch, a 31-year-old woman whose life came to a violent end just 2 days after Christmas in 2024. It happened in Springfield, Kentucky, a quiet town where crime was rare, especially the kind that left entire communities in shock. The holiday season was still in full swing, with families enjoying the last moments of Christmas warmth. But inside one house on Claybrook Avenue, December 27 would mark the end of a love story that had turned into something much darker. At around 3 a.m., a series of gunshots shattered the silence. 10 rounds fired in rapid succession. Neighbors jolted awake, unsure of what they had just heard. When the chaos settled, one woman lay motionless, her body riddled with bullets. Another, older and wounded, clung to life, the echoes of gunfire still ringing in her ears. The shooter? He was already gone, vanishing into the night as if he had never been there. But this wasn't some random act of violence. This wasn't a robbery or a break-in gone wrong. This was personal. The man responsible had driven over 400 miles for this moment, his mind set on revenge. And the most chilling part? Just weeks earlier, the roles had been reversed. The woman who now lay lifeless had once pulled the trigger herself. She had been the one standing over a bullet-ridden body. She had been arrested, charged, and locked away for a crime that should have kept her behind bars for years. But fate had a different plan. A decision was made that put her back on the streets, back into a life that was anything but safe. And that decision was all it took. The man she had once nearly killed wasn't about to let her walk away. In the days leading up to the shooting, he made his plans. He armed himself. He found a way to finance his revenge. And then, on a cold December night, he carried it out. But how did it come to this? How did a once-loving relationship turn into a battlefield? What really happened between these two people that led to one of them hunting the other down? To answer that, we have to go back, before the bullets, before the blood, before everything fell apart. This is the horrifying case of Roosevelt Davis III. Roosevelt Davis III was born and raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. At first glance, he was the kind of young man with a future, athletic, charismatic, and ambitious. He played football in high school and had the kind of presence that made him stand out. But beneath that confident exterior, there were warning signs. His past was dotted with troubling incidents, moments of anger that hinted at a volatile nature. To those who knew him well, Roosevelt could be charming one moment and explosive the next. Khadijah Birch, on the other hand, was a woman who had seen more of life. 8 years older than Roosevelt, she had built a life for herself in Springfield, Kentucky. She was strong-willed, independent, and devoted to her 2 children. Those who knew her described her as caring and protective, someone who carried herself with confidence. But Khadijah wasn't without her own struggles. She had been in relationships that didn't always end well, and over time, she became more guarded when it came to love. It's unclear exactly when and how Roosevelt and Khadijah's paths first crossed, but when they did, something clicked. Despite the age gap, despite the miles between Milwaukee and Springfield, they were drawn to each other. What started as flirtation quickly became something deeper. They spent hours talking, their connection growing stronger. It wasn't long before Roosevelt was making trips to Kentucky, and Khadijah found herself caught up in the excitement of a new relationship. From the outside, they seemed like an unlikely pair, but love has a way of ignoring logic. Roosevelt was young, fiery, and intense. Khadijah was more mature, cautious, and experienced. At first, their differences only added to the attraction. The passion was undeniable, and their relationship moved fast. Too fast. Friends and family noticed the whirlwind nature of their romance, and some had concerns. Roosevelt had a way of making Khadijah feel special, but he also had moments of jealousy, flashes of possessiveness that didn't sit right. At times, arguments would erupt over seemingly minor things: who she talked to, where she went, how quickly she responded to messages. But like many couples, they found ways to smooth things over, convincing themselves that love was worth the struggle. As their relationship deepened, Roosevelt began spending more time in Kentucky. The long-distance aspect of their romance became less of an issue as their lives became more intertwined. But the closer they got, the more complicated things became. What had once been passionate disagreements turned into something more toxic. The first real signs of trouble began with Roosevelt's temper. His emotions ran hot, and when things didn't go his way, his frustration would boil over. Khadijah, who had been through her share of difficult relationships, wasn't one to back down easily. She was strong, but she wasn't immune to the emotional strain of their fights. The relationship became a cycle: intense arguments followed by apologies, promises to change, and moments of calm before the next storm. Khadijah's friends noticed she was becoming more withdrawn, less open about what was going on behind closed doors. Roosevelt, meanwhile, was growing more fixated on her. The arguments between Roosevelt Davis III and Khadijah Birch had always been intense, but by October 2024, something had changed. The tension that had simmered beneath the surface for months had finally reached a boiling point. That night, the walls of Khadijah's home in Springfield, Kentucky, bore witness to yet another explosive fight. Neighbors would later recall hearing raised voices, muffled shouting that spilled out into the night. It wasn't the first time. The fights had become more frequent, more volatile. But this time, something was different. Roosevelt was angry, angrier than Khadijah had ever seen him before. The way he moved, the way his voice cracked with rage, it sent a chill down her spine. The argument, like so many before it, had started over something small. Maybe it was a text message, a phone call that went unanswered, or an accusation flung too quickly. But by the time it escalated, neither of them remembered how it had even begun. What is certain is that at some point that night, words weren't enough anymore. The air between them became suffocating, charged with something far more dangerous than just anger. And then, it turned physical. Khadijah would later say that Roosevelt grabbed her, his hands tightening around her neck, his grip like a vice. She struggled, clawed at his arms, gasped for breath. He was stronger, his rage giving him an edge that she couldn't fight off. Spots danced in her vision. She felt herself fading, and in that moment, pure desperation took over. Somewhere in the house, a gun. Khadijah's fingers found it before her mind even had time to register what she was doing. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. 1 second, she was suffocating, convinced this was how it would end. The next, she pulled the trigger. The sound of the gunshot cracked through the house. Roosevelt staggered back, his body jerking as the bullet tore into him. Blood bloomed across his shirt. He hit the ground, gasping, stunned. For a moment there was silence. And then the screaming started. The call to 911 came moments later. Khadijah's voice was frantic, shaking. Emergency responders arrived quickly, their flashing lights cutting through the darkness. They found Roosevelt on the floor, bleeding, but alive. And Khadijah, she was still there, the gun resting somewhere nearby, her hands trembling as the weight of what had just happened sank in. The police took her into custody almost immediately. The charge? Attempted murder. At first it seemed clear-cut. A woman shoots her boyfriend. There was no denying that. But Khadijah had a different story. She insisted it was self-defense, that she had no choice, that Roosevelt had been strangling her, and if she hadn't fired that gun, she wouldn't be standing there to explain herself. The investigation unfolded over the next few weeks, and Khadijah's claim of self-defense was met with scrutiny. There were questions about what led up to the shooting, about the pattern of their relationship, about whether Roosevelt had truly posed a threat that night, or if this was something else entirely. But what made the situation even more unsettling was what happened next. Most people would assume that after such a violent event, The connection between Khadijah and Roosevelt would be severed permanently, that they would never speak again, that Roosevelt, who had barely survived, would want nothing to do with the woman who had pulled the trigger. But that's not what happened. Instead, in the days and weeks that followed, Roosevelt and Khadijah remained entangled in each other's lives. The bond between them, toxic and dangerous, refused to break. What was it that kept them tied together? Was it love? Was it fear? Or was it something even darker? By December 2024, Khadijah was released on bail, stepping out into a world where Roosevelt was still very much a presence. Perhaps she thought it was over, that she could move on, put the past behind her. But Roosevelt had other plans. He was already plotting his next move. For weeks, Roosevelt Davis III had been consumed by one thought: revenge. It festered inside him, growing stronger with every passing day. The bullet that tore into him back in October hadn't just wounded his body, it had wounded his pride. To him, Khadijah Birch's actions weren't self-defense, they were betrayal. And Roosevelt had never been the type to let betrayal go unpunished. By mid-December, the anger inside him had hardened into something cold and calculated. He knew what he had to do, but there was one problem. He needed money. Money for the trip, money for the weapons, money to ensure that, when he confronted Khadijah again, nothing would stop him. So he came up with a plan. A reckless, dangerous plan. December 25, 2024, Christmas Day. While families gathered around dinner tables, exchanging gifts and laughter, Roosevelt had other intentions. He woke up that morning knowing exactly what he was going to do. The thought didn't disturb him. If anything, it gave him purpose. The Milwaukee air was cold, the streets dusted with snow as Roosevelt stepped out into the world, moving with the kind of confidence that only comes when a decision has already been made. He walked into a bank, a place he had likely passed by dozens of times before, never thinking much of it. But today, this wasn't just any bank. It was his solution. He had mapped out every detail in his mind. The security cameras, the entrances, the timing. He wasn't going in with a full-scale robbery crew or an elaborate heist plan, no. This was quick, efficient, brutal. He pulled out a gun, pointed it at the terrified tellers, and made his demands. The fear in their eyes didn't faze him. He had already crossed so many lines, and at this point there was no turning back. Within minutes, Roosevelt had what he came for. Cash. Enough to get him to Springfield. Enough to buy what he needed. Enough to kill. He walked out of that bank like a man with a purpose. No hesitation, no second guessing. He was already thinking ahead, on to the next step. That night, as Milwaukee remained wrapped in the glow of Christmas lights and holiday cheer, Roosevelt was moving in the shadows. With the stolen money in hand, he wasted no time. He tracked down an illegal firearms dealer, someone who didn't ask questions, who only cared about the cash. He walked away with 2 handguns, fully loaded. But he wasn't done. Roosevelt wanted to be ready for anything. So, along with the guns, he purchased something else. Camouflage gear. He wanted to blend into the darkness, to make himself invisible until the exact moment he needed to strike. This wasn't just revenge anymore. It was war. By the morning of December 26, Roosevelt had everything he needed. The stolen money, the weapons, the gear. He packed his car with precision, his every move deliberate. He knew exactly where he was going. Springfield, Kentucky. The drive would take hours, over 400 miles of open road, giving him time to think, to prepare. But there was nothing left to reconsider. His mind was set. No more arguments, no more second chances. This time, he wasn't coming to talk. He was coming to finish what had started months ago. The road stretched endlessly before him, each mile bringing him closer to Springfield, Kentucky. Roosevelt Davis III barely noticed the passing towns or the highway signs glowing in the night. His mind was locked onto one thing: Khadijah Birch, the woman who had shot him. the woman who had tried to leave him behind. The drive gave him time to think, but thinking only made the rage inside him fester. He had spent weeks imagining this moment, the confrontation, the fear in her eyes when she realized he had come back for her. Roosevelt wasn't just looking for revenge. He wanted her to feel powerless, just like he had felt when he lay bleeding on the floor, gasping for breath, back in October. By the time he reached Springfield in the early hours of December 27, the town was silent. The streets were empty, save for the occasional street lamp flickering in the cold night air. He drove past houses wrapped in Christmas decorations, homes still clinging to the warmth of the holiday season. But there was no warmth in Roosevelt's heart, only cold determination. He knew exactly where Khadijah was. He had been keeping track, watching, waiting. At 3 a.m., he turned onto Claybrook Avenue. The neighborhood was asleep, windows dark, porches empty. It was the perfect time. Roosevelt didn't want to sneak in. No, he wanted her to know he was there. He stepped out of his car, dressed head to toe in camouflage. The stolen money had paid for this, the bank robbery, the weapons, everything had been leading up to this moment. His boots crunched softly against the pavement as he approached the house. He could almost hear his own heartbeat. Khadijah was inside, he knew that. What he didn't know, or maybe he didn't care, was that she wasn't alone. A 52-year-old woman whose name would later surface in police reports was also in the house. Maybe she had been asleep, maybe she had sensed something was wrong, but by the time Roosevelt reached the side door, none of that mattered. With brute force, he slammed his weight against the door. The wood splintered, the lock giving way in an instant. The sound echoed through the house like a thunderclap. Khadijah barely had time to react. Then, bang. The first shot rang out, shattering the silence. Bang, bang. 2 more, rapid fire. Roosevelt wasn't hesitating. Khadijah collapsed, her body hitting the floor as blood spread beneath her. The woman inside the house screamed, but Roosevelt didn't stop. Bang, 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 bang. 10 bullets fired in succession, the muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness like bursts of lightning. And then, silence. Smoke curled from the barrel of the gun, the acrid scent of gunpowder thick in the air. Khadijah was gone. The woman inside the house was critically wounded, her body barely clinging to life. But Roosevelt? He didn't wait to see what would happen next. He fled. The tires screeched against the pavement as he sped away, his mind racing just as fast as the car beneath him. He had done what he came to do. He had finished what had started all those months ago. But if he thought he was in control, he was wrong. Because by the time the sun rose over Springfield, Kentucky, the entire town was waking up to a nightmare. The sound of gunfire had been reported. Neighbors, jolted awake by the chaos, had already called 911. Police arrived within minutes, their flashing lights painting the street in red and blue. Inside the house, officers found a bloodbath. Khadijah Birch lay lifeless, her body riddled with bullets. The 52-year-old woman, barely clinging to consciousness, was rushed to the hospital. Her condition was dire, but she was still breathing. The crime scene was chaotic. Bullet casings scattered across the floor, blood staining the walls. Investigators knew immediately that this wasn't random. This was personal. And there was only one person who could have done it. Within hours, law enforcement launched a statewide manhunt. They had Roosevelt's name, they had his history, and most importantly, they knew one thing: he was running. But the question wasn't just where he was going. It was how far he was willing to go to escape. Roosevelt Davis III was running, but he was never going to get far. The manhunt spread fast. Law enforcement agencies across Kentucky were alerted, and within minutes, patrol officers had Roosevelt's name, face, and vehicle description. It wasn't just about catching a fugitive. It was about stopping a man who had already killed once and had nothing left to lose. But Roosevelt thought he had time. He sped down Interstate 64, his mind racing just as fast as his car. He had no clear plan beyond getting as far away as possible. Maybe he would ditch the car, find a bus station, or even try to slip across state lines. but deep down, he must have known he was out of options. It was just 30 minutes later when reality caught up with him. A Shelbyville police officer stationed along the highway spotted a car moving well over the speed limit. It was barely 4 a.m. There weren't many vehicles on the road, but this one stood out. The Wisconsin plates were a red flag. Most cars passing through Shelbyville at this hour were locals, truckers, or early morning travelers. The officer pulled out behind him, trailing the vehicle for a few moments before hitting the lights. The sirens flashed, the order was clear: pull over. Roosevelt hesitated. Did he have a chance to run? Was there a way out? But he knew the second he stopped the car, it was over. When the officer approached the driver's side window, Roosevelt tried to keep his composure. Maybe he thought he could bluff his way out, but as soon as he handed over his license, the officer's radio crackled. Suspect identified. Proceed with caution. Backup arrived within minutes. Roosevelt was yanked from the car, his hands cuffed behind his back, before he even had a chance to protest. When they ran his information, the entire story spilled out in seconds. Murder, attempted murder, burglary. This wasn't a routine traffic stop. They had just caught a killer. At the Shelby County Detention Center, Roosevelt didn't bother playing games. He could have asked for a lawyer. He could have tried to deny it. Instead, he spoke. He told them everything. He confessed to the bank robbery, explaining how he needed money for weapons. He admitted to the long drive to Kentucky, and, most chillingly, he described how he had broken into Kadisha's house and shot her 10 times. There was no hesitation, no remorse. He had come to kill her. And he had succeeded. Detectives were stunned. It wasn't often that a suspect laid everything bare like this, but in Roosevelt's mind it was already over. He had done what he set out to do. And now he would face the consequences. News of Roosevelt's arrest spread quickly. The case had already shaken the community, but now it was national headlines. A man so consumed by obsession that he robbed a bank, traveled across states, and executed a woman in her own home. It was a story too chilling to ignore. Kadisha's family was devastated. She had spent months trying to escape Roosevelt's grasp, only to have him hunt her down. To them, this wasn't a crime of passion. This was premeditated murder. The 52-year-old woman who had been shot inside the house remained in critical condition. She had survived, but just barely. As for Roosevelt, the weight of his crimes crashed down on him. He was charged with first-degree murder, attempted murder, armed robbery, and burglary. His bail was set at $2 million, an amount no one was willing to pay. He wasn't going anywhere. Now, the only thing left was the trial. Prosecutors were determined to make sure Roosevelt never saw freedom again. With his full confession, damning evidence, and surviving witnesses, there was little doubt he was facing life behind bars. But one question still lingers. Had Roosevelt always planned this from the beginning? Was this a spur-of-the-moment act, or had he been waiting, plotting and preparing for months? Some believe this was always his endgame, that Roosevelt was never going to let Kadisha go, no matter what. And in the end, he didn't. This case is more than just a crime story. It's a chilling warning, a reminder of how love can twist into obsession, how control can turn to violence, and how sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who refuse to let go. Roosevelt Davis III thought he could take fate into his own hands. Instead, he sealed his own. What do you think? Was Roosevelt's crime driven by obsession, or was this something even more sinister? Let us know in the comments. And if you believe no one should ever take justice into their own hands, subscribe to the channel. Because only those who think murder is justified won't subscribe.